Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Can I just check that people in this session were at the previous session? Is there anybody new joining us for this session?
Sir, from our point of view, Mr. Drummond-Hay is here to assist the examination. I'll ask him to introduce himself.
Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Simon Drummond-Hay from HGH Planning and Development. We've produced two pieces of work for the council. The first was the part 2 of the strategic housing market assessment, which disaggregated the overall requirement for housing and looked at the affordable need and the need of particular groups. And we have also produced the council's viability assessment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Drummond-Hay. There are no other new participants to this session. Thank you. That's helpful in terms of everyone's heard the housekeeping rules, and that's good. So this session is in relation to matter 4, issue 6, which is concerned about affordable housing and principally about policy HP 05. And the session this afternoon will focus on questions 36, 38, and 35 of the matters, issues and questions. As I said in the earlier session, we inadvertently put question 37 in the affordable housing section, but we've dealt with that. And since there's no one here who wasn't here this morning, then I'm not planning to return to that. So can I start by looking at question 35 and the issue about the provisions set out in policy HP 05 and whether they're effective and consistent with national policy. I'd like to start off with the looking at whether the requirement for 35% affordable housing is appropriate and whether that is sound. And I'd like to turn to the council and to just briefly explain, and it's been very well set out in documents, but just very briefly explain how they've arrived at 35%. And in my understanding is that it is a slightly higher figure than what was set out in the SHMAR, which I think was something around 30% or 30.6% or something. I think. But can you just take me through that and explain how you've arrived at 35%?
I'll ask Mr. Drummond-Hay to assist you there, sir.
Thank you.
Within the Part 2 SHMAR, we looked at the need for affordable housing. That's a flow that is calculated in line with a rather tortuous formula that's set out within the PPG. It produces a number, and that number isn't a target in its own right, but it is a figure that we use to inform the affordable housing target. It is about 30% of the overall requirement for housing. Clearly, not all sites will deliver affordable housing because some of them are below the affordable housing threshold of 10, and there may be some sites that don't for other reasons. Perhaps they've got particularly high infrastructure requirements. So it's appropriate to set a target that is slightly over the requirement that comes out of the SHMAR. When it came to the 35%, that was also informed, that was tested through the viability process, but I imagine we'll come on to the viability aspects in a moment or so. I think it's as simple as that. We need a target that's a little bit higher than the figure informed by the SHMA, because some sites won't deliver affordable housing.
In that sense, the 35% a precise figure, or is it just rounding up to the nearest? You wouldn't have 31% or 32%, so 35% is what you then consider to be the reasonable one. Yes. Moving up.
So we do these very long calculations, and they all look terribly accurate and what have you, produce figures to a single unit, when actually they are a series of estimates that build up to a figure that then has to be turned into a sensible policy. So it is a matter of rounding up rather than a particular quantitative process.
Thank you. If any of the participants have got any points they wish to raise in relation to the 35%. Okay. Can I turn to the issue of looking at which sites won't deliver at that target? The council has set out a list of sites that might not deliver, and the council's I suppose, and I won't put any subjectivity on this, but there has been a fairly low delivery of affordable housing in over the last 5+ years in Brentwood, and I just wonder whether what confidence there is for the council that 35% can be delivered. I'll come on to issues about viability. I can move on to viability, but I know that HBF has certainly got some issues about viability. But given the low delivery of affordable housing in the past, how is the council going to be satisfied that that rate and that policy can be effective in delivering the affordable housing that's needed?
Thank you, Inspector. If I can answer that one. I think really what you're looking at in terms of historic delivery, and in particular recent delivery, comes back to some of the points that we've been making generally through the session so far on the nature of Brentwood as a place completely surrounded by greenbelt, and thereby there not being very many large sites that come forward, large sites for Brentwood in terms of anything above 20 units, which is the current 2005 local plan threshold for affordable units, are relatively rare in comparison to the small and medium sites that tend to come forward and make up a large amount of the supply of housing within Brentwood, certainly in recent years, as more of those kind of larger sites from the 2005 local plan have been built out. So what we seem to be seeing is generally lower rates of affordable housing on the basis of smaller sites coming forward that do not meet that threshold. Therefore, as Mr. Drummond-Hay has suggested, what we're trying to do here is to look at that and address that within what we consider to be realistic from the evidence, as well as viable in terms of what we'll come on to talk about. Our view certainly is that once large site allocations come forward, that can deliver at these types of rates. We have confidence in terms of, again, the viability, which we'll come on to, but also the ability of those sites to bring forward affordable housing that will be able to meet that target and able to look at that delivery number in future years, when obviously we will be keeping that position under review.
So in terms of the council statement says that the 2005 local plan was 30%, but the delivery on the last 5 years on average was 10.7%. So that's a fairly significant gap, and yet the policy position here is slightly more than 30%. So what is it that has changed?
It's a
proposal in this plan. Is it that you've got bigger sites, but what else has changed that will satisfy us that affordable housing can be delivered?
Sorry, Inspector, and to come in before you'd finish there.
No,
thank you, and Mr. Drummond-Hay can, I'm sure, come in as well to assist. It is essentially the size of sites that will come forward. That is the issue with which we're faced at the moment. We do not have allocated sites that are unbuilt without permissions at the moment in terms of the supply side of things from the 2005 local plan. So I think if you look back over a longer period, you would see that the affordable housing delivery rates have been higher, in particular because larger sites from the 2005 local plan would have delivered those affordable units in line with the local plan policy. What we're seeing now is generally smaller to medium-sized sites that are under the threshold within the local plan, and so by nature you're seeing a reduction in the level of affordable housing because it is not required generally on many sites. You're also looking at things such as the recent changes to national legislation on permitted development, for instance, a sizable amount of new homes coming forward in terms of the supply, and the what we've published from our most up-to-date trajectory looking at the supply position has numbers of permitted development prior approval homes coming forward in that way, thereby not being required to comply with affordable housing delivery. So generally you're looking at a percentage that is decreasing, and therefore the position of the plan is to allocate larger sites over and above the threshold that we've set out within the plan in order to bring forward those affordable units.
Thank you, Mr. Drummond-Hay. Did you had your hand up earlier?
Yes, please. I just wanted to make two sort of small further points. One is that this area, the borough as a whole, is a vibrant part of the housing market and economically active, and development is a good place to develop housing. If you look at the neighbouring authorities, Epping is 40%, Thurrock is 35%, and that's a lower value area. Chelmsford is 35% and has Sill. So 35% would not be out of line with the wider area. The other really important factor is that in 2018, the NPPF was updated. And with regard to development, viability at the development management stage, the scope for challenges have been dramatically reduced to when there are specific circumstances as set out in the viability paragraphs 10.007 and 10.008. Because the council didn't have an up-to-date evidence base or haven't had an up-to-date evidence base historically, it's been very difficult for them to stand firm with their affordable housing requirements. When the new plan is adopted, it will it'll change the way that viability is considered at the development management stage.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes.
Thank you. I think it's a very simple point, sir. The actual policy threshold's changed as well. Just going back to the current plan, which is at 20 units, the plan you're examining is at 10 units. So there must be an element of correlation there between the potential number of applications, smaller sites, to be able to deliver a higher proportion of affordable housing. So there has to be a higher degree of confidence you're going to achieve more affordable housing on the same number of sites in effect.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question about the the council's most recent trajectory, which in respect of Dunton Hills, which is obviously would be a major contributor to affordable housing. How does that trajectory and expectations on Dunton Hills delivery relate to the overall need for affordable housing and the provision of that affordable housing need within the planned period? I think we're looking at specific figure per annum that is required for affordable housing, and so what impact does that change delivery assumptions do for meeting need on affordable housing?
Thank you, Inspector. In terms of the trajectory, certainly Dunton Hills is a large contributor to affordable housing provision generally. Our position is, as we'll come on to when we have specific sessions on that and indeed on trajectory and meeting needs, is that the plan is very close to, in terms of the revised trajectory, meeting those overall needs in terms of what we've spoken about earlier on standard method, and the affordable housing provision is in line with that. So Dunton Hills delivery would have been over and above the delivery of affordable housing. It is broadly in line with what would be required in the plan period.
So in Dunton Hills reduction, I think from something like 310 per annum to 250. Does that have an impact on, in the planned period, the meeting of the overall need for affordable housing? Or
thank you, Inspector. No, because the shortfall is not significant.
Thank you. Can I turn to issue of viability, and I want to be satisfied that what is proposed in the policy can be delivered, and that the requirement has been fully assessed in terms of the viability of the schemes. So can I just ask, I know that the Home Builders Federation have made some points on this. Can I ask Mr. Berent to come in here and just outline his concerns, and then I'll invite anybody else to speak, and then I'll invite the council to comment, and we'll continue that discussion. Mr. Berent.
Thank you, sir. I think it's really looking at the viability studies, and I think it's looking at, as Mr. Drummond-Hay has pointed out, in terms of the more restricted ability to negotiate on affordable housing contributions and Section 106 contributions in general. So we're really just looking at it in terms of the variables that are inputted into the viability study. And so that we see increases in terms of build costs that's coming forward within the what the expectations are within the local plan. Some of those have been taken into account, and also some consideration has been given to what those higher costs would be within the for development in various different scenarios. But there's one that in terms of particular that I have an issue with, and it's one about the, I suppose it's brownfield sites and the land value that seems to have been discussed within that viability study, in that it talks about £500,000 per acre, and this then refers back to the evidence that MHCLG, in terms of their policy assumptions and the values. It seems a bit out of kilter in terms of those particular scenarios. Looking at in terms of the Redbridge area of the southeast, it would be £3 million per hectare, whereas the council are looking at £1.2 million per hectare in terms of their baseline costs. And I'm not sure whether this is a misreading in terms of the evidence, in that the council said that it's £505,000 per hectare. It's in Appendix 10. That's not the per acre figure. That's the average figure in terms of the evidence that they've collected through CoStar. So my concern is that there are maybe some sites in terms of that those brownfield sites that are expected to come forward that have underestimated the land value, the cost of making sure that land can come forward for residential development, as opposed to the existing value of those sites. So it's really just looking at the imbalance there. And I think it may make some sites more marginal. There seems to be a relatively significant headroom in terms of some sites, but it's making sure that that's fully understood. So when you go into that local plan and deliver that local plan, that there isn't a disconnect with what actually the land values coming forward are and what the expectation in terms of land values are with regard to the council's assessment of viability. So that's my main concern, sir. Sorry, sir.
Yeah, sorry. Before, thank you much, Mr. Brent. Before I ask the council to respond to that, Mr. Cronk has his hand up.
Thank you, sir. It's really just in relation to those latter points on viability. Our representations just sought minor rewording, really, of the policy, just to emphasise that instead of talking about requirements, the council should be seeking to reflect the fact that viability means not all sites will be able to deliver affordable housing as the policy stipulates, and also to reflect the council's own evidence on recent delivery, just so that readers of the plan will be clear and the plan is flexible. And our other points really were just trying to ensure that instead of meeting identified housing needs, the plan was seeking to reflect it and bringing in AMR and localised market evidence as well, because the SHMA may become out of date. And also it's important that each site is different and that sometimes councils can point to a specific formula that should be applied on a borough-wide basis, when of course each site is different and each development is different, and the affordable housing provision needs to be flexible in each instance. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cronk. I'm not answering for the council, but perhaps I'd like to check whether my understanding is correct on that point. But paragraph 6.38 of the supporting text to the policy says that only when it can be demonstrated that providing affordable housing is not feasible, viable or feasible, will the council consider accepting financial contributions. I just wonder whether the council can confirm the position that on any individual site, if there is a specific viability issue, if that's shown on any individual site, how that will be dealt with. So if the council could respond to that point, and whether there is a need for any additional wording in regard to that within policy or supporting text, and also whether they could respond to the points made by the Home Builders Federation.
So I deal with the policy wording first of all. The supporting text at 638 clearly reflects government guidance in the sense that if a requirement can't be met, then as a material consideration, one would consider through a viability assessment, for example, whether a lower figure would be more appropriate. I don't think that there is a need to amend the policy to reflect that, because it is something which one would have to take into account as decision maker acting reasonably in any event. And of course, we have national guidance that covers a point. So that will be our position. If on mature reflection, it's considered by you that it ought to be incorporated, then of course we can make a suitable amendment to the policy for further consideration But that is our position at the moment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shardavian. So, in terms of the other points that have been raised by Mr. Brent, Mr. Drummond-Hay. Thank you.
Yes, please. Just before I answer the specific point, shall I just explain how the viability assessment evolved? Because it was over the period that the PPG was updated, and it is quite important. The report was actually completed after the PPG was updated in 2018, so it is fully compliant with the process that is now set out in the PPG, which is the existing use value plus approach, which is absolutely sort of key to the way that these studies are carried out. It included a period of consultation with the industry. I'm not going to say that everyone agreed with everyone through that. There was a certain amount of consensus, but there was disagreement amongst the consultees. I think what we have done is try to strike a balance over the points that were made and taken a series of conservative and typical values. There are and costs. There will be sites with higher costs, there will be sites with lower costs, and there'll be sites with higher and lower values as well. But by taking an average approach, we can be confident that most sites will be able to bear the policies that are tested. It's based on typologies that are reflective of most of the development that's going to come forward, and the strategic sites were considered separately. What's important in the findings is that when we were appointed to do the viability study, we were also appointed to consider SIL. And through that, we recommended a rate of £200 a metre squared to apply to residential development across the borough, other than on Dunton and West Horndon, where we recommended lower rates, which was reflective of the infrastructure the site-specific infrastructure requirements on those strategic sites. Because of the I'm not sure how best to put it, the current uncertainty over the future of SIL in the Housing White Paper and the various government consultations, SIL is not being pursued at the moment. So the recommendations and the findings that we have made are on the basis that there would be scope to have 35% affordable housing and SIL at £200 a metre squared. In very approximate terms, SIL at £200 a metre squared is about £20,000 per unit, a typical house being about £100 a metre squared. Actually, they're typically a little bit less than that, but as a rule of thumb, I think that'll do. So I think it is important to for me to stress that within the appraisals that we have run, there is this sort of a SIL buffer that is not going to be taken up with SIL at the moment. Mr. Byrne was absolutely correct that there have been some changes in the world since we did the viability study, and we've got the things like biodiversity net gain and what have you. We did do sensitivity testing on costs, and those are covered, and I believe that he's more or less comfortable around that. So that leaves industrial values. Industrial values were tested through the consultation process, and and informed the figures that we've used, which is 1.2 million pounds per hectare, which is about £500,000 an acre. It is true that in neighbouring areas to the south, in London, there are higher values. There will be higher values than that within Brentwood as well. But what we're looking at in this study is the type of site that is generally going to come forward under this plan. And it was felt that the £1.2 million a hectare was an appropriate figure. If you were to have the viability assessment at hand, or I can refer you to table 10.2, which is where we set out the results of the base appraisals, we can see what the residual values generated in the full policy on scenario of 35% affordable housing, Section 106 costs of £2,000 a unit, and CIL at £200 a metre squared. And if we look at the brownfield sites, we can see that in all those cases, the residual value is over £2 million a hectare. And in most cases, actually, it's somewhat above that, well, very much above that. So not that I think we're wrong, but if we were wrong on this, and the figure, the base figure, the existing use value for brownfield sites in Brentwood was going to be greater, those sites are still likely to be viable. So even if you used a higher benchmark land value, one would still, most of those sites are going to continue to be viable. There was just one further point that I wanted to make, and that was in relation to what Mr. Kronk said about each site being difficult. Of course, each site is going, not difficult, different, each site being different. It is, that is the case. Most sites are going to be different, but as we set out in chapter 9 of the viability assessment, when we were modelling the typologies, we were careful to make sure that they reflected the types of site that were going to come forward under this plan and be important for delivering the overall housing requirement. So there will be sites that are completely different, and within paragraph 10.007 of the PPG, where a site that is different comes forward at the development management stage, there is scope, specific scope within the PPG for the developer to make the case to consider viability at the development management stage. That's my lot, I think, on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Drummond-Hay, for that. Mr. Barant, would you like to come back on any of that?
I think with regard to what Mr. Drummond-Hay said about coming back, I think that is an important element, and it is included within the policy in terms of being able to come back with regard to viability. And I think that's why it's ensuring that in the viability study itself, it's recognised that land values on particular sites may be higher than what is set out in the viability study, to ensure that actually when it comes to those negotiations, that there isn't a disconnect between what the viability study has said and actually what the evidence is showing in terms of the evidence that we've set out. So it's really just ensuring that there's that balance and recognition within that the land value, that is a relatively, I'd say, low land value in terms of industrial land within the area, and actually it may well be high. So I think it's that disconnect in terms of what those values are, to make sure that actually when it comes to viability, and if it is marginal, that those negotiations are more effective. So,
thank you. Just one point in relation to a point that Mr. Drummond-Hay made, which is about Dunton Hills, and I think Dunton Hills, and I think you said West Horndon, and I know that we will come back to individual sites in due course, but you said a lower figure for square meterage was put in for those sites, reflecting higher infrastructure costs.
Yes.
Yes, and I just wonder then about whether the 35% is still appropriate on those sites, whether the 35% figure in terms of any issues on viability is a figure that should be applied blanket across the borough, notwithstanding the point that's already been made about individual sites might have their own viability cases, which can be considered by the decision taker.
In terms of viability, there are two big costs for the developer. There's affordable housing and the costs of strategic infrastructure. The costs for strategic infrastructure, if we just talk about Dunton, because I've got the figures in my head, was £125 million when we did the viability study, although, as you'll see in the statement of common ground when we get to that, those have increased a little since then. When it comes to the infrastructure payments or the contributions to infrastructure, they can be paid either through the Section 106 regime or through the SIL regime. I'm involved in development myself. Really, it's just who you write the check to at the end of the day. It is just how the pie is carved up and who gets which bit of money and how it is spent. There are advantages of keeping the delivery of really big bits of infrastructure that are reliant on one site tied to that site through the Section 106 process. And that was why certainly that was part of the reason why the large strategic sites were assumed that they would have to deliver their own infrastructure that was required to make them acceptable in planning terms. So there are two things that can be varied. You can either vary the affordable housing or vary the level of SIL. I would. I don't think there's any right or wrong way of doing it. What we have done is assumed that SIL would be payable after all of the other policy requirements have been met. Going back to, I didn't even remember where it was, one of those very early SIL examinations, where it was made absolutely clear that SIL is a charge that should be set having taken into account all the other policy requirements. So that was the way around we did it. We did look at the, just let me have a quick look in the report here. We did look at varying developer contributions within the viability study, and we looked at different mixes of affordable housing, but we didn't specifically look at a lower affordable housing requirement and whether or not that would enable a higher rate of SIL to be attached to Dunton. It was not something that we explored.
Thank you. Mr. Barnes.
Yep.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Part of the issue will be, as it always is around viability and affordable housing, is how you come forward with your viability at a development management stage. Yes, we need to set it within the context of the viability appraisal that's done at a local plan, I think what's worthwhile on this, the particular debate we're having, is to go back to policy HP 5 and criterion C, and also have regard to paragraph 6.37. I think there, to be fair to the council, there is an element of flexibility being built in, that whilst I would call it a target of 35% as opposed to requirement, there is an ability to come forward at an application stage with a robust viability, I think it's described as in the policy, if there are issues in terms of delivering housing. Now, that doesn't necessarily get away from the point you made, sir, as to whether or not should there be a 30% target, 25% target, 35% target for the larger sites. But from a development perspective, so particularly at Dunton, there is this ability to look at an element of flexibility going forward. That's not to say 35% wouldn't be delivered. It's just to say there would be a debate still to be had with the council as you go forward through the development management process. And indeed, it's a start of the discussions that we're having with the council at the moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. I don't have any more further questions on this topic. Is there anything anybody wishes to raise that has not been raised? And no, and is there anything, just going back to the council to finish with, is there anything from the council that they just wish to end on?
No, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you very much, and might see you later on in the various sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.